I would like to call the meeting to order today. I want to welcome our guests, and we're very, very pleased that you could be here today. And I think what we're going to do, because this is a very important time where we have a chance to listen to our guests and a chance to ask questions of our guests, I want to again just welcome you to come, and before we start, I would ask that each one of you, starting with Monique, if you could introduce yourselves and state from which department you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm Monique Boudria, and I'm the Executive Vice President for the Public Service Human Resource Management Agency. I have some opening remarks. Do you wish me to go through it now?
No, what we're going to do is have everyone introduce themselves, and then we're going to start with Kathy O'Hara, because I have a list of presenters and the order in which they would like to speak. So thank you, Monique, for introducing yourself. And the next one?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Linda Lazant McPherson, Associate Secretary with the Treasury Board.
Thank you. Welcome, Kath.
Kathy O'Hara, Senior Associate Deputy Minister at Human Resources and Social Development.
Glad to have you here today.
Donna Miller, Associate Deputy Minister of Justice Canada.
Happy to have you here as well, Donna. Thank you.
And Janet Siddle, the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister at Citizenship and Immigration.
Great. Well, we have a powerful group of women sitting in front of us today, and we can hardly wait to hear your report. So what we'll do is each presenter will have 5 minutes, and at the end of that time we will open it for questions, and we will do what we usually do, having our first round 1, round 2, round 3, and we'll have 7-minute question and answers as we usually do. But to start off, could each of you, starting with Kathy, 5-minute presentation, please? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak about the measures that our department is taking to ensure that gender-based analysis is applied to our policies and programs. We believe that solid analysis on a wide range of issues, including gender, is key to fulfilling our departmental mandate. And as you know, that's a mandate that focuses on Canadian social and economic well-being and has a very broad impact on Canadians' lives. So given that broad mandate, we realize how important it is that gender-based analysis is an integral part of our policy work. I know that before you prepared your report for 2005, you actually heard from representatives of 2 departments, Social Development and Human Resources and Skills Development. The representatives of those departments at that time described how the two departments addressed the issue of gender-based analysis. Donc, chacune avait une approche légèrement différente.
So each has a slightly different approach. Social Development Canada focused on its advisors network and training tools. But Human Resources and Skills Development Canada emphasized instead the responsibility of managers to ensure that GBA was fully addressed in the course of policy and program development, and provided a challenge function through its policy committees.
In February 2006, the new Department of Human Resources and Social Development was announced and was created. So since then, the department has worked on integrating its approach, obviously, then to gender-based analysis. And overall, we take an integrated approach to gender-based analysis. We hold all managers responsible for analysis within their mandates, and gender-based analysis is one of the important lenses that they're held responsible for. And then in addition to that accountability for each manager, at each manager level, gender challenge functions are built in through the process. We have policy committees at the DG and at the ADM level at which, and I will talk a little bit more of those, how that process works. In addition to that approach, we have a unit of 3 FTEs in the International Social Policy and Diversity Division of the Strategic Policy Branch in our department. And that unit is mandated to coordinate learning events, tools, and other resources to assist employees in performing gender analysis. That's a bit of the legacy of the Gender Analysis and Policy Division that had been in the old Social Development Department. During our transition period into the new department, this unit has focused its efforts on meeting interdepartmental reporting requirements, such as contributing to Canada's report on our implementation of the UN Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. But as the new department is coming into place, this unit is going to spend more of its time and resources on learning events and tools. Because I think the department, in particular the predecessor department, Social Development Canada, had a lot of success with what they call learning events. For example, just before the new department was created in January 2006, a gender-based analysis training session was held. It was actually open to employees of both of the former departments. It was basically a course that used case studies and exercises to demonstrate the process of incorporating gender and other diversity considerations at the various stages of the policy development process. Apparently, approximately about 25 people attended, and the evaluations showed that it was actually quite a useful session. People learned a lot about it and got the tools they need to be able to take the integrated approach to gender-based analysis. So this is the kind of thing we think we need to do more of, given that we've taken an integrated approach to gender-based analysis. That's generally how we approach gender-based analysis. What I'd like to do very quickly, if I can, is address specifically the recommendations in your report to demonstrate how we have responded to those recommendations. There was a recommendation with respect to having a designated responsibility center for gender-based analysis in the department. And while I've said that each manager is responsible for gender-based analysis, we have placed the gender-based unit in the branch, called our strategic policy branch. So it's the Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategic Policy who has a particular responsibility for coordinating that unit, making sure that tools and resources are provided. There was a recommendation with respect to participation in the Interdepartmental Committee on Gender-Based Analysis. We are a member. Originally it was the 2 departments. Now the 1 department is a member of that committee and participates actively.
Your time, if you could wrap up, Kathy, please.
I'll do quickly that. I just wanted to make sure I touched upon the challenge function. So we take this integrated approach to gender-based analysis, but then each policy or program proposal first goes through a DG level committee, then it gets challenged, and with respect to a whole range of issues, including gender, that then happens at the ADM level, and then we move up to a committee that's chaired by the deputies. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And please keep in mind, too, that during the Q&A period, when you're asked questions, if you feel there's a point you want to get across, you can integrate that into your answer. And Donna Miller, Associate Deputy Minister, could you please?
Madam Chair, with your approval, rather than taking the time of the committee to read my entire statement, which has been submitted to the committee, perhaps it might be more beneficial if I were to highlight the key points of my statement for a few minutes. So in Justice Canada, we have a fully integrated model of gender-based analysis. We think this model works well, mainly for a couple of reasons. First, it's built upon the premise that GBA must be everybody's concern, that you cannot build sound analysis unless everyone is sensitized to gender and diversity issues across the department. And the requirement to be sensitive is owned by everybody, not just a few. This way, we think that GBA becomes a routine and substantive consideration in all the work we do. Deuxièmement, le modèle pleinement
Second, this model, which is fully integrated, works because we have established a good foundation before, in fact, adopting it. For example, we spent 15 years developing our expertise, and during that time, we implemented a specialized diversity and gender equality unit, and we have also given advanced training to our employees. Without this solid foundation during the preliminary stages, our fully integrated model would have been almost impossible to implement. We needed to do this foundation work in order to ensure that our organization can evolve and become more sensitive and aware of this issue, in order to ensure that the fully integrated model can successfully work.
Contains a few examples of how our integrated GBA justice policy works in practice. I'll highlight two. One example concerns former Bill C-2 on the protection of children and other vulnerable persons. That legislation, you'll recall, contained many important measures, but one of the areas where GBA was front and center was on the changes to facilitate the receipt of testimony by vulnerable victim witnesses in specific types of offenses like spousal abuse, like sexual assault, where women are the primary victims. GBA played an integral role in the development of our better policy in those areas. Another example concerns the work of the Policy Center for Victim Issues, which is part of our policy division in the department and which provides the victim lens for all criminal law reform and criminal justice policy development. Again, GBA is an integral part of the work done by this group where the needs of women as victims are well documented. Finally, to have a successful integrated GBA model, one must have employees who are sensitized to these issues. Training helps, and we've done a lot of this over the years. But changing demographics have played a very key role in supporting our goals on GBA. D'abord, la nouvelle génération.
First, the new generation has a global view of the world and analyzes things in an integrated and exhaustive way with a lot of practical sense. And what is just as important is the role and representation of women within the department, which has changed considerably. There are more women than men in the department, and there are more women than men, lawyers and managers. Even at the board level, which is the most important body presided or chaired by the deputy minister, half the positions are now filled by women. This demographic change has contributed to the success of the integrated model of GBA.
There's always room for improvement. We have new things to learn. We continue to evaluate ourselves. We assess whether we have it right, but we feel that we're well positioned to face any challenges. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to appear before you today, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Well, thank you for that very insightful presentation. And now we will go to Janet Siddall, the Associate Assistant Deputy Minister of Operations.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and honourable members. Thank you for this opportunity to provide you with an update on the progress we have been making with gender-based analysis in CIC since we last appeared before this committee. May I draw your attention to the fact that we do have a handout for you that I will be making reference to in my remarks. As you know, CIC is the only federal department required by law to analyze and report to Parliament on gender-based impacts of our policies and programs. And this legislative requirement is quite unprecedented in federal statutes. We certainly take this requirement very seriously at CIC. Our work in response to this opportunity is ongoing, and as I will outline further, we have continued to make progress since we last appeared before the committee. As you may recall, the function of gender-based analysis was first established in 2000 in Citizenship and Immigration. In 2005, we centralized this responsibility in a gender-based analysis unit within our strategic policy branch, and at that same time, we launched our 5-year strategic plan. In addition to conducting this analysis on behalf of the department, the unit also provides tools, training, and support necessary to maintain and indeed strengthen our capacity for gender-based analysis throughout the department. Establishing the unit was a great start, but we realized we need to do more and to do things a bit differently. So last spring, following a reorganization in our department, we decided to move the gender-based analysis unit to provide greater opportunities to strengthen and integrate it into all existing departmental planning and reporting processes. The responsibility now falls under the Corporate Planning and Reporting Group, and their responsibilities now include providing guidance, planning, reporting, and capacity building for gender-based analysis. The gender-based analysis is now carried out at the branch level, where most of our department's policy and program work occurs. We are looking forward to implementing gender-based analysis throughout the department and finding ways to make it part of our day-to-day business at CIC. For example, gender issues are included as part of the general discussions taking place in our policy committee, a new decision-making forum to discuss departmental policy directions for CIC. As I have mentioned, the analysis is taking place at the branch level. Our 5 policy branches in the strategic and program policy sector have gender-based analysis plans and are in the process of updating them on an annual basis. These plans have resulted in tangible results, some of which were outlined in the annual report to Parliament on immigration, which was tabled in Parliament on October 31st, and we've included it in your information package. I am pleased to report that the results of gender-based analysis were included in our annual report of 2006 for the first time. For example, possible gender and diversity issues were analyzed by by us in 2006 when we responded to the plight of some 800 Karen refugees that were going to be resettled from Thailand. The analysis allowed us to address and mitigate any issues that may arise during their settlement process. Further analysis is underway to help us work more effectively with the sponsoring groups and service providers to ensure that these new arrivals to Canada receive effective support to their targeted to their individual needs. A second example, we have used gender-based analysis to help us more effectively deal with the issue of human trafficking victims, of which most are women. We recognize that women who are victims of this crime have unique protection needs. Instructions have been sent to all of our officers advising them on appropriate interview techniques and the importance of informing victims about counseling and other resources available to them as traumatized victims of crime. To further assist the victims of trafficking, we have instituted a temporary resident permit for 120 days to ensure that victims have protection and legal status in Canada. This status also affords victims access to medical and psychological services as required to deal with their experiences. This 120-day period of reflection gives victims the time they need to assess how they would like to move forward with their lives, including the choice of whether or not to assist with any prosecution of their trafficker. For those who wish to remain permanently in Canada, CIC provides them with the information required as how to proceed. In addition to the initiatives outlined in the annual report, you can find other examples of GBA taking place in our department. We continue to use gender-based data in our Facts and Figures publication, which provides information on new permanent residents in Canada as well as temporary residents entering Canada to work or study.
Jana, we're just close to the end now. If you could just quickly wrap up, I'd appreciate it.
So CIC is proud of the accomplishments that we've made to date, but we realize that there is much more work to be done. we are happy to be here to provide you with further information on some of the steps that we're planning to take.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to the question period time. I would ask Linda Lizette McPherson, the Associate Secretary of the Treasury Board Secretariat. Could you present next?
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to appear before the committee on the Treasury Board Secretariat's progress in the area of gender-based analysis. I am pleased to have with me Monique Boudria as well from the Public Service Human Resources Management Agency of Canada. As part of the Treasury Board portfolio, the agency is responsible for a number of the human resources policies, including the employment equity policy. And also behind me is Jeannie Fleming, Assistant Secretary, and Jeannie is the TBS gender-based analysis champion, as well as Hélène Norando, our Assistant Secretary of Labor Relations and Compensation Operations. Today I'd like to update you on the progress we've made in implementing our commitments on gender-based analysis, and I think the committee may also be interested in some of our recent findings on closing the gender wage gap, and this is actually very good news. I'll begin with our commitments as set out in the government's response to your committee's report, the Gender-Based Analysis Building Blocks for Success. And in this document, the Secretariat laid out 4 areas that we were committed to working on. Premièrement, assurer la formation des employés sur...
First, training staff on the use of gender-based analysis within the context of our mandate. Second, screening the Treasury Board management policies to ensure that there are no unintended gender impacts.
Management resources and results structure policy, also known as the MRS policy, that requires departments to use performance information in the management of their programs, including those with gender-specific objectives. And our 4th commitment was ensuring that the Management Accountability Framework, MAF for short, that making sure that it makes reference to assessing analytical capacity and practices in departments. Madam Chair, TBS is committed to gender equality, and I think our accomplishments speak to that commitment. But before I go into detail, I'd just like to quickly outline the division of roles and responsibilities between departments, the Privy Council Office, and Treasury Board in respect to this matter. Il incombe au ministère d'appliquer l'analyse comparative.
Departments are responsible for the application of gender-based analysis and for the inclusion of gender considerations in their policies and their programs.
And supports the process of policy making government-wide, and specifically the considerations that have to be applied consistently in the development of public policy. And our role at TBS is to ensure value for money in government programs and oversight in the management functions. Once programs are approved by Cabinet, we perform a challenge function on the implementation of these programs. Je vais maintenant vous parler de nos réalisations.
Now, let me review our accomplishments, beginning with our commitment to training.
2 different streams based on our 2 main responsibilities. And the first role is really the challenge function that we perform on the Treasury Board submissions that we receive from departments. And the second is our management policy development and oversight role. Cet été, nous avons mené un projet pilote.
This summer, we ran a pilot project on gender-based analysis for the analysts who performed the challenge function. We worked closely with Status of Women Canada and would like to thank them for sharing their valuable tools, expertise, and support. We are now developing additional training events and materials based on the results of the pilot session and are incorporating this training into our annual cycle.
For renewing and reviewing the management policies, they receive training at the outset of the policy renewal initiative, and in fact we'll be conducting 2 training sessions specifically on gender-based analysis later this month. Our second commitment was to ensure that management policies do not include any unintended consequences from a gender perspective. And in the Federal Accountability Action Plan, the government committed to reviewing and renewing the entire suite of management policies to make sure that accountabilities and responsibilities are clear. And in addition to the training that I just mentioned, we've also put in place tools and a rigorous process to make sure that our policies don't include unintended gender consequences. And in each policy, we actually go through a very rigorous process and analyze them.
Madam, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your time has run out. If you could just wrap up.
Okay. And we have a tool that we use that specifically asks if there is a potential impact, and if there is, there has to be a thorough analysis done. We also have a broad manage the MRS policy really requires department to lay out the specific performance indicators.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have to keep within a time constraint, but thank you for that very insightful presentation, and I'm sure that members around the table will be anxious to ask you questions, at which time you can also fill in some factual information. I would like now to call on Monique Badreas for a presentation. Monique is the Public Service Human from the Executive. She's the Executive Vice President of the Public Service Human Resources Management Agency.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure for me to be here this afternoon as a representative of the Treasury Board portfolio. When I last spoke to this committee in March of 2005, I provided an overview of the significant work that we do in support of gender equality. Today, I would like to provide you with a bit of a progress report and tell you how we are integrating gender equality analysis and gender issues into our ongoing work. The Public Service Human Resource Management Agency has a lead role for implementing the Government Human Resource Modernization and Renewal Agenda. L'agence exerce son leadership de diverses façons.
The agency shows leadership in a number of ways, but its main role concerns wage equity to ensure that Canada has a public service that is representative and inclusive. We don't only ensure importance for both men and women and the status of equality because we are required to by law, but because this is part of our values. Two of our values, equality and equity, are successfully integrated into the public service, and this ensures that we can take advantage of the competencies and skills in the population and ensure that we allow women to take fully part in the public service and in the federal government.
We work in close collaboration with the Treasury Board Secretariat to strengthen and to renew the policy framework of the government. Consequently, our HR policy analysts have the same opportunity to follow the courses on gender-based analysis. In support of this work and as a reflection of our lead responsibility for HR management in the public service, we are undertaking an exhaustive consultative process with key stakeholders, including unions, to modernize our HR policies. The consultation process helps to ensure that a diversity of perspectives and concerns, including gender equality, are brought to bear on the development of new and revised policies. Dans la même veine, l'élaboration de nouvelles normes de classification.
In the same way, the development of new classification standards in the public service of Canada and the gender-based analysis are at the heart of our concerns. We have to ensure that the work done by the men and women in the public service are of equal value, and our classification systems are in fact based on that value.
Public Service of Canada, and as we strive to sustain the delivery of excellent services to Canadians, we are also strengthening our accountability frameworks and incorporating gender analysis. Our efforts are coordinated with those of the Treasury Board Secretariat under the Management Accountability Framework, which has specific components addressing human resource management as well as values and ethics. We have developed a people component of the Management Accountability Framework, which identifies 7 strategic outcomes. Each outcome has multiple indicators which enable us to assess, monitor, and take into account the overall health of human resource management in the public service. We are now in the process of collecting and analyzing departmental information from that exercise, and we will be using it to assist department in improving other things, their performance with respect to employment equity and achievement of equity-based goals. We will do this by providing advice, sharing information and best practices, and through workshops and information sessions. Additionally, we have strengthened our research capacity to ensure that we can improve not only human resource management practices, but also human resource planning in the public service by facilitating the identification of current and future needs for human resource management. Such analysis will continue to include a significant gender dimension as we seek to capitalize on higher female participation rates in our labor force and as we respond to challenges in the area of recruitment, retention, and demands for alternative working arrangement, learning, and career progression of our employees, including persons in all the employment equity groups. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I want to thank you very much for your presentation, Ms. Pedrerius. That was very well done, and we look forward to the question and answer period. But prior to that, we were supposed to have representation today from the Department of Finance, and unfortunately, Rob Wright, the Deputy Minister of Finance, has been advised of a last-minute meeting with the Minister. And so he said he's very pleased to appear at a later time before the committee, and he has been so kind to provide me with some speaking notes, but did not have time to put them into translation, so those will be put into translation and distributed to the committee as well, right?
I believe the Department of Finance
is
available in both languages. It's Treasury.
Okay.
Accidental one language.
Okay. The Department of Finance, I've been advised, is available in both languages. It's the Treasury Board that needs to be translated still, so you'll get that at a later date. Sorry about that. So we'll make sure that the committee is provided with all these documents.
Do we get that right now? And that I think it affects our questioning.
They have been distributed already, and you should have them in front of you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let's not find somebody to send.
Well, this was just right at last minute, and so the Deputy Minister of
That's the whole
Finance.
point.
Excuse me. Order, please. The Deputy Minister of Finance will appear before the committee at a later date. This was unavoidable. Now we'd like to go into the question period, and we'd like to start with the questioners have question and answer period. Sorry? Oh,
I wonder,
Ms.
Madam Chair, if I
Davison.
could just add for the benefit of Dr. Bennett, I think this committee had made it clear that we wanted deputy ministers or assistant deputy ministers, and that's perhaps why there wasn't someone else sent in the place.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Davidson. Now, if we're all ready, we will proceed to the question and answer period. We will have 7 minutes per questioner, starting with Ms. Minna, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, it is unfortunate the finance isn't here because it's actually at the core of a lot of what happens, especially with budget time. I thank all of the members, the deputy ministers who have come today because this is very important. My first question actually had to do with to finance, but I think some of the questions I can ask, and maybe the relationship to finance is also here because essentially these you need to deal with that. And my first question was, what kind of financial resources do your departments receive? And we don't know about other departments in terms of some of you are doing some good work with respect to maintaining and training and in this area. Just very briefly, so I have a series of questions. If you wouldn't mind just kind of giving me some quick answers, if you could. And that's the one, in terms of your financial resources that are dedicated to this area. What resources are you given or are put aside? And the other question is, at budget time, does the Department of Finance expect whatever proposals from your departments go into budget to have a GBA analysis done before it goes into the budget process? Not after the fact, but before.
we have, as I mentioned in my comments, a unit of 3 FTEs dedicated to that. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what the operating budget is because that's where some of the training is, but I could get you that information.
That would be helpful. But, sorry, go ahead, just very briefly. As far as, okay, with respect to, go ahead.
All right. Ms. Miller? Question was
Sorry,
was directed to
4 or 5 of you, I guess.
Thank you.
Very quickly.
So in order to answer that question, I need to refer back to my remarks about how in Justice we have very much an integrated GBA analysis. So it's not part of one particular section of our department. So it's not possible to really answer the honourable member's question with directly, because GBA is part and parcel of everyone's role in justice.
Is that the same for all of your departments in terms of the integrated process? Okay, what about the requirements from finance at budget time? When your various departments put forward budget proposals, do you need to have done your analysis before it goes into budget process to finance?
Certainly for CIC, yes, because it's also part of our legislative requirement that it doesn't get out the door unless it's had the gender-based analysis.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, no? Just nod, yes, no, just so I can move on. Sorry.
I think, as I said in my comments, we do it for every policy that we work on.
That would be the same for us as well. All of our management policies, it's an integrated part of it. Mm-hmm. And similarly on the training side, it's now integrated into our annual training process. So we don't have a separate budget. It's integrated in with training as well.
So all policies that go to finance from your various ministries go through that process first?
Well, in our case, policies, management policies would go to Treasury Board ministers for approval, and yes, that analysis would be done in advance of that. They would never go to Treasury Board without that analysis and understanding of potential impact. Okay.
My other question is that there was a report or a task force done which was commissioned by the previous government, and there was a report was in December 2005, and one of the recommendations that it made, and the reason for the task force at the time was because of the difficulty of getting GBA across the whole of the government. I understand in your departments there are some departments that are doing better than others, and at the time there was talk about legislation, and the report does recommend, and it's got guidelines for a possible bill. I wondered if any of you have read that, and what you might tell me what you think of that particular recommendation, and whether or not we need a bill, not with respect to your departments, but maybe it's not a fair question, but just tell me what you think of that recommendation and how it's structured. Because I'm thinking that the departments we hear are probably the ones that are more in tune with the GBA as opposed to maybe some others.
I think that there are different ways of approaching gender-based analysis, and certainly what we would say is whichever way is chosen, if it's legislated or if it's part and parcel of what we do, which is how we function in justice, we think that the focus has to be on outcomes. In other words, it's about, do we achieve the priorities, the outcomes that we're looking for? GBA is an essential tool to achieve our outcomes.
Would you see legislation helping us get there faster in any way, and not necessarily in your own department, but across the government, the whole of the government structures?
Well, speaking for justice, because GBA is so closely associated with charter and equality rights as well, it's a part and parcel of the work that we do. So again, although we obviously would take any direction from the government, and if the government chooses to legislate GBA, so be it. But it's so inherent in the work we do. I think the question that I would pose is, how does it help us achieve better our outcomes?
Okay. Oh, I see I'm running out of time already. All right. I guess that'd be my final question until my next round, if I have another shot. How closely do you work with the Status of Women Canada? Do your departments work with Status of Women Canada with respect to this issue?
I suspect we all do, in the sense that at any time a policy proposal is submitted for cabinet consideration, all policy proposals go through fairly elaborate interdepartmental consultation processes, and so Status of Women Canada is always a participant in that process, and that's another layer, if I can call it that, of challenge function, if I may, when proposals go forward.
Does Status of Women Canada, I think they initially were the lead agency or a department in this area for some time in terms of training. Do you know if they're, maybe it's not a fair question, are they now still working with other departments or all departments? Or
Ms. Mena, I will just let you answer that. Perhaps if you'd like to answer that, then we'll go to Madame Deschamps.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I can't, I didn't hear the question.
We're going to have to leave that for now and pick it up later. Madame Deschamps.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first, I'd like to greet you and welcome you. Thank you for coming in response to our invitation and giving us your presentations. I'd like to continue along the same lines as my colleague who said and who was asking you whether Status of Women Canada, well, the committee had recommended in a report in 2005 that there be support for the departments in their GBA. And I'd like to know, because in the documents that we have been provided, Ms. McPherson talked about this, and she thanked Status of Women Canada for their cooperation. And my question concerns the other departments here as to whether Status of Women Canada had supported you in your GBA. In my case, given that PISHMAC is responsible for human resources. It's different from other departments and agencies which provide direct services to Canadians. But I can tell you that by working with the Treasury Board Secretariat, which has the mandate to look at GBA, our employees access the courses in cooperation with the Status of Women Canada. And in our case, we work much more closely with Human Rights Commission than with Status of Women Canada because of our mandate as an employer within the federal government.
Speaking for Justice Canada, I can advise that we've always had a strong partnership with Status of Women on gender issues. I think as well it's important to position the Department of Justice insofar as the work that we do, because we do play a strong interdepartmental role, particularly given that we have lawyers in each of our legal services units in each department that play a challenge function to ensure that where they are consulted, that the policy is sound and that the legal advice, for example, the Charter Equality Rights, is factored into the development of policy. So to answer the honourable member's question, yes, we have a strong partnership with Status of Women. Secondly, Justice itself has strong relationships across the whole of the Government of Canada because of our position of providing legal advice and the fact that we have lawyers in most, if not all, of the departments across the government.
For CIC, I could say we worked very closely with Status of Women in developing our own capacity and our training, and we believe that we've got our own internal capacity, but we continue to collaborate on training sessions and presentations with Status of Women and our other government departments.
Okay.
Do you have anything to add? Yes, the same thing.
Status of Women, but increasingly try to build up our own expertise and our own tools. For example, I mentioned case studies that we use during training events, and I think that's one thing we have the capacity and would like to do internally, is work on our case studies.
In 2005, the Alliance had made public a study by economist Armin Nanesian on the 10 last federal budgets, which clearly showed that cuts were made at women's expense, and that the good years, however, had not been to the advantage of women either. So I would like to know whether there has been some rebalancing of measures within the government in favor of women, particularly with regard to housing, employment insurance, childcare, wage equity, in order to ensure that the problems women face are dealt with.
I'm not familiar with the study that you're referring to, so I'm not exactly sure what the author was referring to. I think over the past few years, certainly with respect to our department, there have been improvements in the employment insurance system, for example, with respect to maternity and parental benefits. The government really recently introduced a universal child care benefit. That the primary beneficiaries are women. There have been improvements in the guaranteed income supplement, and I think this committee has talked about this before, how over 2/3 of the recipients of the guaranteed income supplement are women. So I'm not exactly sure what the author was referring to, but there have been some initiatives. I'm not sure what time period she was referring to, but since then.
Madam Deschamps, you have another minute.
Well, there have been cuts that were announced in September, which also affected a number of programs for women. And I'd like to know, in those cuts that occurred on September 25th last year, the GBA, was the GBA affected?
I just wanted to actually respond to the previous question you had about some of the changes we've seen inside the core public administration as an employer. What our research has found is that over the past 15 years, the gender wage gap has actually shrunk by more than half itself. There is a short deck, a statistical presentation that we will share with the committee, highlighting some of the really significant progress. So I think we've made good progress. We've also made headway to, in addition to reducing the gender wage gap in the public service by almost more than half. More encouraging, I think, is the fact that the gender wage gap in new recruits and staff under 35 is now 2%. So at this rate, I think we can expect to see even better overall results.
Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off. Our time for that member has just run out, but certainly you could continue in your other answers. And Mrs. Davidson. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much to our witnesses this afternoon. Certainly, it's an extremely important issue and one that, from your testimony, is not only important to us, but certainly important to you as well. So I just, actually, my question was going to be for Linda, and it was going to be on the issue that Madame Deschamps has just introduced. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to hear everybody's full testimony, but thank goodness we have the written before us, because I was very interested in what you had to say in here about your update on the recent findings for the gender wage gap. And so I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that. You go on to say that over 15 years, the wage gap has shrunk by more than half. And so maybe you could just elaborate a bit more on what you were starting to say to Madame Deschamps, please.
Okay. And this is our research, and really this research was undertaken subsequently to the request that this committee, in fact, made. And we found that this wage gap reduction was really as a result of a number of factors, including the effectiveness of our employment equity programs, pay equity settlements, the professionalization of work outside inside the core public administration,
and the fact that more women have chosen to further their education. So, and what our research is showing is that the gap is continuing to decrease. And perhaps, if I may, I just share a few more statistics that we will certainly share with you following this session, but I think would be of interest. So, as I said, the gap over the past 15 years has narrowed by over 13 percentage points. Our wage gap is 11% versus 17% for the general population. And one of the main reasons is increasingly there are more women being hired into highly paid jobs, and that's up from an average of 53% to 61%. So that is also very significant. And now almost twice as many women work in management, scientific and professional and administrative jobs than they did in 1991. And largely this is because what we're seeing is that new recruits coming in, they're coming in at higher paying jobs. So, and finally, for the under 35 age, the wages of men and women are almost identical. There's just a 2% gap. So we're definitely moving in the right direction. This is an area where we need to continue to really monitor our progress, but I think as we expect the wage gap to continue to narrow, particularly because as the male-dominated baby boomers start to retire in greater numbers over the next few years, and also a lot of work being led by the agency around classification, modernization, and the new standards that we've put in place to include safeguards to help mitigate potential gender bias downstream. So those are just a few statistics that I think really speak to some of the progress we've made inside the core public administration.
Okay, thank you. Do I have more time? Oh, great. I wanted then to go back to your two commitments that you referred to, and I'm going to go to the second one, please. And you said your second commitment was to ensure management policies do not include unintended consequences from the gender perspective. Could you talk a bit more about that, please, and tell me how that's happening? And
we have an initiative that we've launched to review all of our policies. And we're about halfway through that, perhaps not quite as far along. But in addition to training, so we've provided the training for the folks who are actually developing the policies so that when they are preparing them, they're sensitive to it and understand what that means from a policy perspective. And once the policies are developed, we also have an internal challenge function. But as part of the policy development process, we have a very strict template and a series of questions that each of the policy centers has to answer, including one of them that specifically speaks to the potential impact on gender. And
many of them?
Pardon me?
Have you had to alter many?
So far we've had 27 that new policies that have been updated or approved. We have not had to update. We've altered some, but there has not been an impact from a gender perspective. But those are related more to like financial management, internal audit, and so forth. The ones that we're now getting into are more of the human resources ones, and that's where we think there likely will be an impact, and so we're watching those very closely, and some of that work is actually being led by my colleague from the agency as well.
And is there a time frame on that?
The time frame, we're targeting to have the policies renewed and updated over the next 18-month period.
Thank you.
You have another minute if
More
you'd
time?
like to.
Yeah. All right.
I'm used to having 7.
No, I'm not used to 7 minutes. I guess to Donna, you talked about from justice that GBA is inherent in everything that you do, and that you're not really sure whether legislation would speed things up because it's already there. Is that the case in all of these departments? And I think it is from what I heard from everyone. Are there other areas that you know that we need to be looking at, or is that a fair question?
To answer that.
And that may not be fair to ask you that, I don't know, but as women involved with GBA and so on, we need to know if there are other areas, so it's...
I'm not aware of any areas specifically, but I'm speaking, of course, only for our department. But I'm not aware of anything. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matheson.
Thank you, and thank you for all of this. It's certainly appreciated. I'm wondering, and I'm building on my colleague's question, has there been a gender-based analysis of the cuts from last September 2006 on the programs, not on your department specifically, but on the programs? We know that literacy, Status of Women Canada, Court Challenges, Law, Commission of Canada, all were affected among many. Has there been an analysis of the impact of those cuts?
In terms of the reductions, I think there were some very clear criteria that the government set out to really assess whether or not a particular program should be cut. There were four. You'll recall in the budget the government promised to review the programs to review all programs to make sure that every taxpayer dollar was spent to achieve results, to provide value for money. And the funding was either reduced or eliminated for programs where there were unused funds because of lower take-up of programs or because objectives were achieved through other programs. The second reason could be if they did not provide good value for money. The third is that these programs could be delivered more efficiently by streamlining or consolidating, and finally, if they were not meeting the priority of Canadians. So those were essentially the four main criteria that were set out, and that really formed the basis of what was brought forward.
Okay. Do we know the impact, though, of all of that? Has there been any analysis of the impact it's had on communities, or has that not been pursued?
Not from an overall global perspective. I think, presumably as departments were contemplating, where the reductions were going to be, that would have been, one of the factors that was considered. But as I said, those were the four criteria that those were the really primary lenses that were used.
Okay. Ms. O'Hara, you talked in your brief about your department using its efforts to look at the CEDAW recommendations, the implementation of CEDAW. And I wondered, there's been a great deal of concern of late, and we've heard it from a number of women's groups about Canada's failure to meet its obligations. And I'm wondering, what's the current status of CEDAW? What's happening to that work? What did you discover in terms of that process of working towards implementation? Where are we, in other words?
Sorry, this is with respect to the International Convention?
Yeah, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination.
Right. I'm not well placed to speak to that directly because I wasn't involved, but if you like, I can get material to you on what exactly we provided in the process. I think, unfortunately, it was before I arrived in the department, so I don't know exactly, but I will undertake to find that information for you.
Okay. And is that work ongoing? Do you know?
It's an ongoing process, but I would try to find exactly what we have provided for you.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'll address this third question to all of you. Ms. Lizette McPherson's presentation indicated that the Privy Council Office plays a critical policy role, or a critical role in terms of GBA, and essentially that role is to ensure that departments and agencies have used appropriate GBA lens in terms of their consideration of what they do. I wonder if you could please tell me if the Privy Council has asked your department to amend policies because of GBA with specific examples. And I think that question was sort of alluded to, but I wondered if you could get more detailed.
I couldn't give you a specific example. I think what a number of us have said is that at various points in a policy development process, there's what we're all calling a challenge function with respect to GBA. So the analyst is expected to use GBA when it gets to the next layer. The assistant deputy minister is asking questions about the impact, a broad range of impacts, including gender. The next step is you go out into an interdepartmental process. So other players, in particular, as I think we've talked about, status of women, they're then asking you those questions. And then the other central agencies are asking exactly the same kinds of questions, and even through the cabinet committee process, you find the same kinds of questions. Ideally, obviously, the issues have been addressed. That's a whole part of the challenge function at the interdepartmental process. Is if you haven't done your gender-based analysis, if you can't answer the questions about impacts, you go back to the drawing board and get the information and then include it in your policy proposals.
And is there adequate capacity? Do you feel that there is adequate capacity to fulfill the GBA requirements and or the implementation of GBA in your departments at every step along the way?
Speaking for Justice Canada, I'm quite confident that we have the capacity. I think we have the capacity very much at a ground level, and as Ms. O'Hara was explaining, in the development of any policies, there's challenge points, both within departments and across departments, including PCO. What I would say is that the capacity is high. In justice, it's partially because of the demographics that I mentioned. It's also partially because GBA is so closely linked with equality rights analysis. And, of course, we have so much training and expertise developed in our department on equality rights analysis that also exists to enhance, I think, sensitivity on GBA analysis.
Ms. Miller, and we're now going to go into round two, and in round two we have 5 minutes each. So, Ms. Minna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll be sharing my time with my colleagues, so I'll try and be very quick. A couple of questions. The first one is when you do GBA analysis in any of your departments. When you do GBA analysis in your departments, do you include racial or other factors that women, Native women, Aboriginal women, in order to be able to actually, because I know it's women, but women are different, and so I'm just trying to.
That's an interesting question because just recently our ADM policy committee looked at this question of gender-based analysis, and that's exactly what came out of that discussion. What they called it was the intersection, that you want to look at female Aboriginals, females who are disabled, female immigrants. There's kind of always an intersection almost of policy, so quite right. Gender-based analysis almost all invariably includes.
So you are including those factors
Absolutely.
In your analysis now?
Yes.
Okay. It's an area that I've, and in the EI analysis as well, unemployment insurance with respect to women, and I know that there was an analysis done and showing that the changes of 96 to the Act were having a negative impact on women disproportionate to men. I remember the first report that came out. Is that still the case, and do you know if there's any further analysis done with respect to the EI changes of 96 to women nowadays?
I'd have to follow up. As you know, the EI Commission produces annual monitoring reports, and I must admit I haven't looked at the last one, but I could provide the last one. They do that produce a report every year on the impact.
Okay, I'd appreciate.
I'll provide the last year's report.
Okay, my last question very quickly is, do you collect this disaggregated data for your information, all of you? Yeah, and disaggregated data?
Certainly CIC does, and in your package in that CD-ROM is quite an extensive breakdown of disaggregated data.
The others you don't?
We certainly, in Justice, recognize the intersection of both gender and gender from various lenses, but we do not track that data. It's part and parcel of our policy analysis, but we do not track it uniquely.
Okay, I gather others don't either. Yes?
Our situation would be the same. It's integrated.
Okay, so those of you that don't, actually, it'd be nice if you did. I think it'd be helpful. I'd like to flip to my colleague, Ms. Bennett, please.
Thanks very much. Madam Chair, I noticed in the notes from the Department of Finance that the department had appointed a gender-based analysis champion. Could you find out if that person's in the room?
Well, if we could continue on with this questioning, is there anybody here from? Well, the Deputy Minister was asked, Madam Bennett, to appear. He will appear in the future, and I think we should continue on with the question. Do you have a question?
My concern is that the budget will be tabled on March the 19th, that a lot of our questions are really based on whether there will be a gender analysis of that budget. This is something we've been pushing for a long time. So I just was wondering if there was somebody from the Department of Finance in the room who would come to the table.
Well, Ms. Bennett, what we asked for was the Deputy Ministers, and so we can look forward to having, perhaps I can get at the very next meeting, because there will be time then when we get back on Tuesday. I'll see if the Deputy Minister can be there. I don't think it's fair or planned to bring somebody else in. I'm not aware of anybody here able to step up to the plate. We did ask for Deputy Minister. You have 1 minute left. Did you have a question?
We actually would like to know, I think on this side, if we could call, if there was somebody in the room from the Department of Finance that we could call to the table.
Well, I think that's an unfair, because we asked for the Deputy Ministers. I don't believe.
But I see in his remarks that there is a gender-based analysis champion for the department who I think would be an appropriate witness if that person is in the room.
We decided at the last meeting to call.
But you don't actually decide. We actually have more numbers than you do.
Excuse me, you're out of order. The fact of the matter is we had invited our guests to come, the Deputy Ministers to come, and I don't think there's anyone else prepared at this point in time to do that.
Could we ask?
We asked the Deputy Ministers to come.
No. Could we ask if there's somebody from the Department of Finance in the room at the time, right now, that could come to the table?
I think that's very unfair, because we asked for the Deputy Ministers. Nobody else is prepared to come or prepared to come and sit here unless they have their notes.
I'm sorry, but if you're the gender-based analysis champion for a department, you should be able to answer a few questions.
We asked the Deputy Ministers to come. The Deputy Minister will come.
I'm telling you that this is extraordinarily time-sensitive, Madam Chair. We are about to table a budget. For 10 years, we've been asking for a budget to have a gender analysis on it before it comes to Parliament. And this is, so we would like to know, as a committee, will this 2007 budget have gender analysis done on it? Because in the remarks here, there are a lot of subjectives. Wherever possible.
Order, Ms. Bennett.
A pilot project.
You can ask that question to the people sitting there at the table. Maybe someone cares to answer Ms. Bennett's question about that.
I would like to challenge the chair, based on the people on this side of the table, as to whether or not we could have somebody from the Department of Finance come to the table.
Ms. Bennett, we asked for the deputy. I'll check with the clerk, but I don't think this is appropriate. Well, as I said, I did just check with the clerk as well, and she concurs that, we have asked the Deputy Minister to appear. At this time, it is inappropriate to ask Madam Bennett
to change our invitation.
Madam Bennett, you're out of
champion.
order. Could I please finish my sentence?
What I was saying is that I will ask the clerk to ask the deputy minister to have a representative, if at all possible, at our very next meeting. Today, it is inappropriate for a committee to call somebody out of the audience to present at the table. You have very few seconds left. You have a question of the people sitting here.
I believe that the next meeting is after the budget, Madam Chair. So it is just my understanding of the civil service in this country is these are highly professional people who are very good at their job. They love what they do. They are at any time prepared to answer questions of what's going on in the department for which they are responsible. So I don't understand why somebody from finance didn't come when this is a study about the role of central agencies, and they are the key person. So I don't.
Question for the witness, Ms. Bennett.
Yes, I'd like to know from each of the witnesses whether they had anything in their budget submission to the Department of Finance, and whether it under every department had a gender-based analysis. When under Trudeau, people couldn't send something to Cabinet, an MC, without a gender-based analysis or to a budget. Is that now in place?
In place for CIC.
What I would say in terms of Justice Canada, Honourable Member, is that if gender is an issue that is part of a subject for an MC, or in any policy proposal where gender is relevant, GBA charter analysis is an integral part of the submission that's done.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton.
Madam Chair, and good afternoon to our panel. Thank you for your presentations and for sharing some time with us this afternoon. As you explained the progress that has been made on a number of different fronts, and we look at the lens through which gender analysis is accomplished, looking at policy, looking at programs. You've mentioned, and I think Madame, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced this, Lizot McPherson, mentioned some outcomes. I wonder, are there any other, what are the measures that you use to, in fact, see what those outcomes could be? You talked about the gender wage gap. I assume that relates to the public service. Because it relates to programs, do you look at measurements of the impacts in terms of society as well?
That would not be part of our mandate. One of the other things we do look at is in terms of whether or not departments have sufficient policy capacity, and as part of that, so the management accountability framework, or the MAF assessment, we do this on an annual basis to really assess a department's management capacity. And one of so there are 10 different evaluation key indicators, if you will, and one of the areas is really their overall policy development capacity and analytical skills, which would include things such as, do they factor in gender-based analysis, official languages, and so forth. So that would be part of a consideration in one of our indicators.
Considering that the gender-based analysis culture is continuing to become more a natural part of the policy development process, and as Dr. Bennett pointed out, this stretches back not just years but decades. What's in front of us as we move forward? You've already suggested, for example, that you're beginning to see that gender issues are starting to merge with an outlook at diversity in general. As we go forward and as these gaps continue to close, do you foresee a period of time where, the notions of purely gender-based analysis will begin to just blend into that broader base of just good practices and policy making with respect to diversity? And I put this particularly to our program people, justice, immigration, HRSDC.
I would certainly say that I would agree with what you were saying. I think there's two ways certainly to move a process forward like gender-based analysis. You can have the hard controls like the legislation which we have at CIC, but I think that equally important are what I would call the soft controls, and I would say our values and ethics and our commitment to values and ethics, and certainly in CIC into employment equity and diversity are a very important part because we imbue that. We do a lot of training in all of our employees at all levels of the organization. So the final goal being this should be second nature. This should be just part of the way we do business in citizenship and immigration.
And just to add to that from the viewpoint of Justice Canada, we think that it's inherent in any sound policy analysis or legal analysis that there's a reflection on the social implications of any policy proposal. So often, of course, social implications speak to gender and to diversity issues. So, but it is very much part and parcel and an integral part of our legal analysis and our policy analysis.
Just add, Donna talked about the number of female lawyers in the department. I was quite struck when I was preparing for my presentation. I wondered about our policy analysts, whether they're male or female. So what we did is we looked at the ES category, or the economist category, which are largely the people in the department who do the policy work, and it reflected my gut instinct, which was over 50%, 55% of our ESs who are doing our policy analysis are in fact women. So it's another way of getting back to your question. I think it is just part of policy. It's instinctive. It's part of policy analysis. And to be honest, when you have 55% of your policy advisors who are women, and they're inevitably going to be bringing those issues to play.
Thank you very much. You have time, Madam Chair?
Yes, you do. You have 2 more minutes, Mr. Stanton.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Monique.
Well, I just want to say a few things about the employer, the Government of Canada. I think that we are evolving from employment equity to management of diversity. And even though we may have, a better representation of women at one point, there are other issues related to family issues that we are to look at. And it's interesting enough, like paternity leave and daycare and taking care of the older members of the family and so on and so forth. It's coming at us, as well as looking at the other, we have also a duty to accommodate for people who are disabled, but also for people who have other issues that are about religion and other things like that. So we hope to move to that kind of diversity management so that the workplace is more conducive to all that kind of diversity in the future. And one of the key stakeholders for us, obviously, are our unions. And I may say that when we do a review consultation on our policies, they're there looking at it, and they have their own policy advisors within the unions, and they're very, very careful at looking at what we do on women's issue and equity issues and so on and so forth. So we take good care of their comments in terms of integrating that in our process.
The other thing I might add, Madam Chair, is that the other thing, the trend increasing that we're seeing in terms of collective agreements is, a shift that there is much more of a focus and new clauses, for example, allowing pregnant employees to come back sort of on a graduated basis. And so we're starting to see some very different kinds of clauses emerging, and I think that we can expect to see more of that as we move forward.
So if there's any...
I think we've run out of time, Mr. Stanton. Thank you. Thank you for your answers. Ms. Vai?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't often sit on this committee, but I'm pleased to see people from Citizenship and Immigration here. Obviously, I think my questions will be going to Ms. Siddle. What I'd like to know, and I'll give you a little break there to all the others, immigrants represent a large proportion of women, and I think that this figure continues to grow over the years. And it's, in fact, a resource that we have a number of them succeed economically and very well, in fact, and really make a significant contribution to our economy, to community life, political life, human rights. We can look at the women from Quebec, in fact, who represent major unions or major women's organizations, for example, the dynamic nature of the Women's Business Network, women who are members of financial associations as well. But with regard to immigrants and refugees, when they apply for refugee status, and I think, Ms. Sidden, you are aware perhaps of prejudices that can occur with regard to the Immigration Act, particularly with regard to equity and their recognition as heads of family. For example, their situation when they are refugees, in fact, they often arrive here and they are on social assistance. This prevents them from bringing their kids over and their spouses as well. There were measures that were recently taken or implemented or that are in fact being imposed to prove family relationships. There are DNA tests to prove family connections, blood ties, and a series of other measures that have been implemented. Point system for candidate selection is one example. What I'd like to know, and I could name a number of conditions that affect these women. For example, the wages in other countries. Here in Canada, we have a wage gap. We are making progress, but in a number of countries, the progress achieved is not as significant as we have here. I would like to know, in concrete terms, what is the action plan that Citizenship and Immigration has to address the obstacles facing these women? And perhaps also, could we have some information on efforts and funds used to do this?
Well, I believe I have multiple questions there. But in terms of the different streams of immigration that we have, we certainly did the gender-based analysis on our selection criteria for skilled workers. And there's no indication that it is biased against women. It's gender neutral. For example, we give credit for the experiences of a spouse, whether it's male or female. We also extended the work experience from 5 to 10 years in recognition that women would take time out of the workplace to raise their families. When it comes to our refugee selection, of course, we're looking at most vulnerable groups, and in fact, our policy is to resettle those that are most vulnerable, including women and women at risk, and that is a disproportionate now part of our program. We also recognize what we are trying to do with the new settlement funding, over $300 million in the last budget, will certainly assist in settlement programs for all newcomers to Canada, but in fact, we are reporting and accountability mechanisms indicate that 65% of our clients for language training, for example, are women. So this will certainly benefit them. So you had other questions there, but I'll summarize it as that we believe we make strong efforts to evaluate our policies and our programs, family unification included, and make adjustments if we have to wherever possible.
Okay. Dans les documents.
In the documents that you have provided to us, you indicate that you are reviewing the Citizenship Act. Are there measures, concrete measures, that will resolve the problems and prejudices experienced by women?
Well, I'm not sure I'll back step. I think where issues have been raised with us, for example, in the documentation we have mentioned a review of the living caregiver program, review of the trafficking program. So we are taking steps where those, and working with the not-for-profit community and women's groups to look at those issues.
Well, here in black and white in your document that you are reviewing the Citizenship Act. Is this still true? Are you going to resolve problems that women face as a result of prejudices within the Citizenship Act?
Time is up right now, and we have to go to Ms. Matheson. Ms. Matheson?
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. In a recent report, I was looking at this document, but we had testimony from the Professional Business Women of Canada. and they talked very specifically about the growing gap in terms of men's and women's salaries. And that gap, income gap, has widened actually between men and women who are university graduates. And I think it was something quite astounding. University graduates who are female making something like 48% of what their male counterparts make. And there was a reference to a report, Equality Beyond the Illusion. That was a 2005 report. So I'm wondering, when we see this report and hear the testimony here and hear from others like the professional businesswomen, why these discrepancies, these contradictions? Is it because things like women, by virtue of the fact that they have so many obligations outside of their job and don't perhaps work as many hours or can't go after the promotions that men would go? Is that a possible explanation for the difference between what we're hearing here and what we heard from the professional women? Or has there been any analysis of that done?
I could maybe speak to some of that. I think you had some remarks from one of my colleagues at Human Resources and Social Development, Barbara Glover, who was a witness here, who spoke, I think, to this issue. My sense from looking at some of her data is that in many ways it depends whether you're talking about full-time work, part-time work. The gap varies depending on that. I think the age issue is quite interesting, and I think there was some data presented that for university graduates under 25 years of age who are working full-time, there in fact was virtually no gap between men and women wages for that group. So I think it's really important to sort of disaggregate it, if I can.
Okay, so those women under 25 would likely be single women who probably weren't in that vice of trying to be all things to all people. So with that in mind, yeah, and so with that in mind, this sort of skews the kind of information that we're hearing here today, does it not? And doesn't really present an accurate picture of what is going on with women out in the larger community by taking those slices rather than looking at the larger population and the reality that that larger population faces.
I mean, I guess one answer is the extent to which, in some cases, we know women who are mothers of children, certainly under 6, are choosing to work less than full time because they want to do childbearing as well as work. So I think that's in a way why it is important to disaggregate. You have to we know that people are making different choices, so it's hard to generalize about a particular group without knowing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and perhaps not choosing at all. Perhaps they can't find childcare, or they're in this vice a lot of women have described of trying to do too much and bearing 60% of all work in society.
Like the sandwich generation women,
generation.
Yes, exactly.
Just if I might add, in terms of the report from looking at the core public administration, the numbers that are included in the deck that was circulated, that includes all employees types, so casuals, full-time, as well as part-time employees.
Okay. Thank you. Have I more time, Madam Chair?
You have 33 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The 2005 report, Building Blocks for Success from Status of Women, said that in order to have real accountability mechanisms in GBA, we needed advice from outside groups, from the equality-seeking organizations. And I just wondered, have those organizations been included in this process? And if so, who? And what were they able to provide in terms of support, advice, information?
Just very quickly, our time is up. Maybe just a sentence or two. We have to go on to the next question.
Just very quickly, in terms of preparing for today, we did not consult with equality groups, but the Department of Justice has a very strong working relationship with many NGOs, including equality-seeking groups, and we view that kind of consultation as an essential part of good policy development.
Thank you. Ms. Grewal? You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all for your presentations. And what I would like to know today is what impact does the gender-based analysis have on your departments in terms of human resources, financial costs, and implementation delays for legislation and policies?
Well, I think that we all previously suggested, certainly it's true for citizenship and immigration, that we have integrated the gender-based analysis throughout our policy and program areas. So we don't have, when we started up, we had dedicated resources, 3 full-time equivalents, but we completed our training, and so I can't give you an exact figure, although we have at least 1 dedicated resource in our planning and accountability part of the department to ensure that the accountability is there. In terms of the resources, because it's part of the policy developing process, it does not cause delays in program or policy development because it's integrated into the whole consideration as policies are developed.
Similarly with justice, when gender equality analysis first came into our department back in the 1980s and moving into the 1990s, we did have a discrete section in our department whose role it was to ensure that gender and diversity issues were considered across the whole of the department. That is not the case today. As I mentioned in my remarks, we're now at a different phase, I think, in the understanding of diversity and gender assessments, such that it is fully integrated and is part and parcel of everyone's responsibility.
That would be the same situation with our department. As with CIC, we do have a small number of dedicated FTEs who are involved in I've talked a little bit about learning events and trainings, but basically gender-based analysis is integrated into our ongoing business, so it's part of everybody's job, every analyst's job.
Clearly, that would be the case. We've integrated GBA in our policy and program centers in terms of their work. But I would say that in addition to that, as part of our expenditure analysis and compensation planning division, in fact, it's the team who prepared this particular report. Part of that group, we have a few people who are focused more on the gender-based analysis and from a core public administration, just to see how we're doing in terms of overall diversity and employment equity and so forth. So there's ongoing analysis that we do on the core administration.
Well, in our case, I would say it's almost the same in terms of GBA is part of our capacity of policy analysts. But in addition to that, we have a branch that is looking at employment equity and management of diversity. But we have included women, the 4 underrepresented group being the people with disability, the native visible minorities, and women all together. And we are looking at this as an overall approach to representation for the Government of Canada.
Tell me what sort of training and support is provided by Status of Women Canada to other government departments?
Respond to that question. You mean Status of Canada to other departments?
Yeah, what support is provided by Status of Women Canada to other government departments?
It's not part of my mandate, so I could not answer your question. Sorry.
Anyone else?
Mentioned earlier, and initially when we were developing our capacity, they were very helpful to us in developing our training. We feel that we have a fairly mature training program now, so we're less involved with them on a day-to-day basis, but certainly work with them in terms of any new initiatives or conferences, etc.
And that is precisely the position in Justice Canada.
And that would be the same with Victoria.
Thank you.
Well, we have 27 seconds left, so there's not much time, and I think maybe what we'll say is thank you to all our presenters today for coming and giving your expertise and your very insightful comments. We all as a committee thank you for the time that you have spent here today. I would say, too, that I'm going to suspend the meeting for just a couple of minutes to allow our guests to depart from the room, and I'll call the meeting back in 2 minutes. Meeting suspended briefly.